Okay, you guys ready?
I'm ready.
Good. That's what I like to hear. 3, 2, 1, go. This is Thursday.
This
Yes, it
is Thursday.
And we are recording
We
our
are
show.
going.
314.
Hello.
There we go. How about a little more enthusiasm with that hello? Geez, it's like we're a spam caller.
Well, I know number. I don't know you.
Chris, it's great to have you back. Chris is a very private person, Matt and Landon. He doesn't even want you to know anything about him.
Except for all the things he shared last episode.
Yeah. He barely wants you to know he has parents, from what I recall.
My parents may know. Maybe I didn't. I don't know.
You guys, just to refresh the fan appendix, Chris appeared in the Speeches by Prisoners series, the Becoming Jesus episode, and that supplemental episode. But he's back. We're not talking any prisoners tonight, but rather, if you remember, Chris is an expert in the computer programming world, very knowledgeable on many things digital and technological. So with us discussing the film Blade Runner's famous Tears in the Rain speech and AI, and how I am somewhat regularly asking Chris at the climbing gym, tell me more about how much we should worry about AI, and he's sort of like calming my fears. We can get a flavor of that for this intro call. So that's why he's here.
Hey, thank you. Good to see you again, Chris. Here. Good to hear you again.
Yeah.
Chris, I'm gonna brag about you. You've already done probably more legwork than most of our intro callers. He watched the entirety of Blade Runner.
Oh, yeah.
And, of course, I'm sure did lots of just general thinking on the topic leading up. Would you have hesitated to kill Roy like Harrison Ford? Although there's some plot issues there with that point, but let's just pretend that he was deliberating that. Would you have hesitated to kill Roy, the robot?
I mean, if it came down to it and it's him and I, absolutely not.
Okay. Noted.
I wouldn't want my eyes gouged either, so.
Yeah, he did just gouge someone else's eyes out recently. It's like suddenly he gives a poetic speech and Harrison Ford's like, oh yeah, whatever.
But technically Roy was about to decay or die.
Yeah, he was gonna die anyway.
Harrison Ford also might have been a replicant.
Chris, how does the film, in your expert opinion of AI in the future, how does it match up with what you think of as a realistic future of AI?
I'm not an AI expert.
Yeah, but you're more than these doofuses.
I would say the film is clearly very much dystopian. If being humans are left to their devices, and we're going to do stuff like that. We're going to make replicants or AI that is meant for war, and that's what Roy was. Is it over the horizon? Potentially. Is it near to us, like within the next 20 years? Probably not. Certainly a possibility in the future, I think.
Chris, do you use AI much in your day-to-day either work or life or anything like that?
Personally, I don't, but professionally, there is a test program that's happening. They want us to experiment with it in our day-to-day. So that's my exposure to it.
In terms of like coding, seems like it's able to kick out some pretty good, introductory code or like the framework of code that you would then edit off of. Have you tried any of that or?
Yeah, I've touched it a little bit. Would I give it requirements that say make this system and have confidence in it? Absolutely not. But if I had an existing code base or something that it could, gather context from, if it provided smarter suggestions, which I'm seeing in my testing so far, it works sometimes. If you're writing code to test other code, it's pretty good at generating boilerplate, which can save a lot of time. But in terms of this is an original idea or this is a really solid piece of code to X, Y, and Z, it's my experience. It's not anywhere near that.
This is your moment to shine as the showman introducing the episode. So remember, put your own little flourish on this.
I think I got it.
And if you mess up, we're going to have ChatGPT introduce us. Okay, take on over. It's you.
You guys are in for a good episode talking about Tears in the Rain, which is a speech given by a replicant at the end of the movie Blade Runner, the original. And tonight I'm introducing Mike, Matt, and Landon.
Hey, let's cue the music and go on from there. Thanks, Chris. You did great.
All right, thanks a lot, guys.
Michael Schaefer, Ross Johnson, Matt Schultz, and Landon Fry are all here this evening. Free.
I'm just gonna say it. I've been thinking it for 10 minutes. I don't want a podcast scared.
Oh yeah.
Now I've seen the road. Pregnancy is a beautiful thing. Pregnancy is a gift.
There are stories to tell.
What kind of paint sticks to asteroids? Like, if you don't prime your walls.
Afraid some days, but the road will lead us to a better place.
We are called to emerge from that default setting of self-involvement.
Let's go.
Here we go. Great introduction by Chris. And he's right. We're doing the Tears in the Rain speech by the replicant named Roy Batty. Boy, would that be a great trivia question and a trivia contest. What that replicant's name is. I'm pretty sure not even Harrison Ford would know the answer to that. Pointed out in our outline, it seems like a pretty consistent theme here. Ross tends to pick the most American speech. Landon picks the oldest. Matt picks the most conservative. And I find one from a movie that I like. I wanted us to revisit the topic of AI after that very mediocre HAL episode. I decided to revisit. And the world has changed since that HAL episode as...
HAL?
Nice. Because ChatGPT has become a very prolific agent within society, if you will. Why don't we go ahead and listen to that very short clip to get things rolling in the correct direction. Ross is not on tonight. You just have 3 of the Stooges. Here's the speech.
Quite an experience to live in fear, isn't it? That's what it is to be a slave. I've seen things you people wouldn't believe. Attack ships on fire off the shoulder of Orion. I watched sea beams glitter in the dark near the 10-Hauser Gate. All those moments will be lost in time, like tears.
done a man's job, sir.
Man, that is such a short speech. Too bad. So, context for this, again, just to clarify, Blade Runner is sort of known as a cult classic, maybe a little bit less so now that Blade Runner 2049 came out a few years ago. But takes place year 2019. These replicants, they're called, just these self-aware AI robots that look exactly like people, are a small amount are on the loose, and Harrison Ford is a sort of special cop who is hired to kill these robots. The time to die reference is the fact that they are set to expire after 4 years, as a way to like sort of manage, control them, and his 4 years is up. Let's go ahead and roll into I guess first reactions.
I'll start. Kind of a weird movie.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I don't know if I would turn to someone and be like, have you seen Blade Runner? When I hear I've never watched it until yesterday, but I definitely know that it has a lot of cultural sci-fi weight. There's rumors the new Tesla truck, which is probably a real thing coming to market, is like a Blade Runner adaptation model. It is a short speech. I kind of do wonder why, when you think of 1980s speeches, even in the movie genre, even in sci-fi movie genre, like, did you actually viscerally remember these 2 lines? And do you think they carry enough weight in and of themselves to do a podcast on? Or is it more of the context? I mean, there's definitely artistic elements that I think, you watch it now, you're like, I've seen this in every other sci-fi movie, and there's probably enough that on the lineage tree ties itself back to there. Fun fact, like, when you throw out nouns like Orion, I assume that's like context of Orion was in the 2 lines, like a little bit of a nod to like he's fighting galactic battles. Tannhauser was a Pole. Tannhauser was probably a German poet in the medieval times who later, in like 1400s, the guy might have lived in the 1200s, sprung up. He discovered the underground home of the goddess of Venus. So like medieval mythology. It was probably, when Roy said that, like a nod that he's been like on the farthest reaches of the sky and in the depths of hell.
Whoa.
Okay.
Dang.
So,
I like
I mean,
that.
Well
when there's
done.
capital words in a 2-line speech, like, what's going on here? The AI itself, when I ask what does Blade Runner mean literarily and mythologically, it does say that Roy kind of has like the fact that he had like pure white hair, and it did say in whatever 500 words, like he was kind of had some Christ-like themes worked into his character. And I think the fact that like Tannhauser was like hell and Orion, heaven, was like, I've been to the depths.
And just gouged a few eyes in between.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. just like Jesus.
But
it was just anger.
Yeah. Maybe. Yeah, that was pretty good. I was curious about those 2 references. I just kind of figured they just meant like really cool, spectacular things. But
yeah, Matt and I apparently have the curiosity of a loaf of bread.
But I think of the movie Hoosiers. Like for some there's a connection, I promise. So I didn't see the movie Hoosiers till I was like 28. Or almost 30. I think it was almost 30.
I was pretty old too. Yeah.
Like, I knew it was a classic movie, whatever, but I saw it and I'm like, this is so cliche. Why would people like this movie so much? Until you're like, oh, wait, this is the movie that all the other movies are based off of. I feel like maybe Blade Runner kind of fits into a little bit of that category. Kind of like the OG
Yeah.
Because I know you mentioned there's a handful of other like dystopian, futuristic things. I feel like that. I mean, chronologically, I think that was the first amongst those 80s dystopian films, I believe, right?
Yeah, this is the second time I watched the film when I rewatched it last weekend. And I did see Blade Runner 2049 and I thought it was very long, and the world is just as smoggy as it was in 2019. Landon challenged me, can a 2-line speech carry a podcast, or is it more just the general context of me trying to over leverage speeches from the 80s in order to talk about what I want? And it's maybe a little bit of both, but I think the speech itself does set up the sort of things that are on people's minds right now with AI, because what the speech challenges or posits, despite the fact that it is sort of like silly, because what's sympathetic about Roy? Like, oh, you're dying and you've only been alive 4 years, but you had this wild, adventurous life to the gates of the netherworld, metaphorically, and Orion's belt, right? And then of course he is having these experiences because he is actually aware, right? And that's, as I understand the commentary, and it makes sense when you watch it, that's why Harrison Ford is sort of like standing back in a sense, like, oh man, he does have experiences. Maybe I shouldn't kill him, even though he's about to die anyway. So the question I sort of want to explore in these different ways tonight, especially, is, can AI have experiences? Obviously, definitely not right now. But if it gets to that point, what does that mean? And the fact that it cannot right now, what does that mean for, or with respect to, things like art that it generates, or any sort, quote unquote, art that it generates, or any sort of, quote unquote, meaningful content that it is prompted to generate right now. Speaking as an artist in the discipline of novel writing, I have played a little bit with editing just little pieces of paragraphs, or even, this will be an interesting anecdote, maybe I'll share it in completeness later, plugging in paragraphs from the classic Uncle Tom's Cabin and seeing what it says about it. It says some very interesting things. My first reaction, sort of like I said, the plot is sort of goofy. It doesn't make sense why it is always dark in the future. They don't explain why either Harrison Ford sleeps during the day only, or why the sun has gone out. It is one of those films, yeah, very much a cult classic, where the plot is just, you obviously understand the broader storyline, but you have a desire to understand like these little details of different characters, and it's just impossible to follow unless you're a nerd and gonna research all that stuff.
I think the setting and the dealing with AI, like I don't tune into many sci-fi movies. I kind of tend to write them off. It felt Matrixy to me. The plots are different, the themes are different, but just the darkness of the real world.
Yeah.
The Matrix, like when you think of the Matrix, it's like action shots, like avoiding bullets in slow motion. And this was very much, there was never any like, there's like 2 or 3 fight scenes. They ended pretty quickly, but it was mostly dialogue and just like a slow burn of a plot, which I don't think you could get away with today. Like, it's got to just be like nonstop action, and you couldn't have this subtle 2-line epic speech that it's like, what does this mean? Like, most of the speeches in movies today are just like on the head. It's like, oh, I get what you're trying to say. Like, You just beat me upside the head with it.
I don't know. I feel like we could challenge that, but nothing comes to mind. So why do you guys think that dystopian movies were so popular in the 1980s? Doesn't this relate? I remember you did a Google of this during a podcast.
I did, and I know what you're talking about, and I did find the link again.
Yeah.
It is called the List of Apocalyptic Movies by Decade. Pre-1954, 50s, 9, 60s, like 18. Technically, I would call the 70s the breakout decade for apocalyptic. We'll call it 28. A lot of like, one of them's called A Boy and His Dog. The other one's A Distant Thunder in the 70s. Planet of the Apes was the 70s. So more like Wizards, the Holocaust. Those are the 70s names. Technically, the first Mad Max was 70s. Stalker. So Noah, Black Moon. I don't know. Those seem more non-technological. And then in the 80s, you go from 30 to probably 40, and the whole genre takes off. Blade Runner was at the beginning of the maybe the tech or the AI or the technology being the prime suspect of our demise.
So I have a hypothesis as to why that was the case. My hypothesis, briefly, of why there were so many now more dystopian apocalyptic films beginning in the 70s, 80s, is because life started to become so much better than anyone could have imagined, right? That it became once you have so much more free time now, I think that most common tendency is to imagine what could go wrong, what could take it from you. So maybe this technology that we have created, says 1970s, 1980s person, could potentially be our demise when they become evil versions of us or something like that.
Like nobody had computers yet. I'm just some reference points is here to back you up. Like I also think of like the Apple commercial, which was like 1984. So I think one answer might be like that dystopian novel, the original dystopian seminal work was set in 1984, and you're just like approaching it. So Apple riffed off that. It maybe started heating up, but I don't think that's perhaps a second principle. I think yours, Mike, might be more foundational to like, yeah, it was a decade past the most, heated racial strife. We're 10 years, that was the 60s. I don't know, the 70s weren't, I don't think that bad, not as bad as the 60s anyway. So you're like beyond that. I don't know what they didn't have computers, they didn't have cell phones. What was so easy about the 70s?
I get
and is it just that it was like, we're also 20 years past our last real nuclear scare. Yeah, the Cold War's going on, but it's not really a thing anymore. We're not that afraid of it. Was it like really low tangible fear, and then we kind of had to make up a lot of fear?
I mean, I feel like the specter of like nuclear things in the Cold War could have been still like an influencing factor, or at least like maybe it was just far enough away that it's not like you could make a movie about it and people would see it. It's not like, it's like making jokes right after something bad happened. Like you can't too soon, I might suggest, at least with like, I feel like it just was like a huge action film decade, just with like Schwarzenegger and Stallone and Jean-Claude Van Damme, like Chuck Norris. Like it just seemed like maybe the stars at the time just like lent themselves to like, I don't know, dystopian robot killing and stuff. I don't know.
I don't know. I don't have a good answer to your question, Landon. Like what was what was the, I mean, I guess Matt was sort of trying to answer it. Yeah. What's the tangible, like, obviously now it is Chat GPT. Like we can literally basically hold it and say, look guys, it could become Roy Batty. Versus what were they holding in 1982 other than an Apple II or whatever they were called?
Atari. Ataris are gonna kill us all.
I mean, they were trying to sell computers to the masses. So like computers were around in the 50s and 60s in academia, and then the 70s in big businesses. And it was just like,
sure,
it was on the cover of Time magazine in 1982 or whatever. So it's like, how is this thing going to alter our lives? And let's make the worst possible scenario movie out of it. And hyperbole that. And
I don't know. I mean, maybe there's just something intuitive about robots. I mean, obviously there must be if we at some level strive to create them. So we've attempted to answer the question of why the 80s were so popular or became the beginning of the popular time for dystopian films, maybe 1970s. So I think this does tie into sort of what we were previously talking about, and hopefully will flow nicely into the next set of discussion questions here. I'd say from, we'll say, gosh, this is just like the movie Terminator, where it's like August 17th, 1997 is when robots became self-aware, because I'm going to do something similar here and say November 2019. Okay, so we're going to call that the beginning of a new timeline in my head. That's when ChatGPT 3.5 or 3 became publicly available. And my first reactions was, you heard things like, it acted like it acted goofy, essentially, right? And so like just feeling sort of uneasy about that, and hearing more and more just anecdotes of how it communicated. So from November up until probably a month ago, just did not really touch it at all. Now, as I said, I've sort of played with it with respect to the novel I'm working on, not like making.
Now you're writing a novel a day. You're just like, boom.
Yeah. But there is that like sense of apprehension. It's like, oh my gosh, you're trying to create this art, and is the AI just going to mimic it, essentially? So that's sort of what I wanted to explore of why I wanted to pick this speech. The first discussion question then to explore based upon those concerns, and I've sort of been playing with, can AI create art? Because I was reading an article recently, Amazon cracking down on self-published novels that people are putting out that were written by AI. Just, I'm sure we've all seen at one point or another, just interesting illustrations created by AI. You can look up quote unquote AI photography. So maybe let's start with that sort of broad question. Can AI create art? And let's also keep in mind, to keep it tiny with a speech, of anything from the speech that will assist you in answering the question positively or negatively.
It's a 2-line speech.
Landon is just riding the pride of his first reaction. Just crapping on everything else.
No, I
he's attacking you like the ships firing on the shoulder of Orion.
Won't you admit that's a hard question to tie into those 2 lines? Though?
Well, maybe I need the lead apparently, since I've got the answer.
All right, I'm gonna put ChatGPT down in the ground below Tannhauser's Gate. All right, that's there's a reference. I think symbolism seems like something AI would be capable of, at least in like a rudimentary way. Not terribly accurate, maybe inappropriate somehow.
Well,
but
when you say what do you mean exactly by that?
Like,
sentence?
I mean, I've heard of people writing a poem, and I imagine a lot of poems would involve something like a metaphor or simile, something like that, where you're, as far as I know, and maybe I'm wrong here, but it seems like AI for right now requires human prompting. Like it requires you to do something to like elicit this creation.
Yeah, it's not just doing its own thing.
Yeah, that's what I mean. So like, to me that seems like a fundamental aspect of art is that there's an inspiration to do something. There's volition that occurs within the person and then brings it out into, expression, right? So like expression is the final product of art, but there's these other things that happen prior. Like I guess in that sense, no. Yeah, and that's why I feel like, one way I've heard people describe ChatGPT is like, it's like a B- version of anything you want it to be, so it'll write a B- poem, a B- paper. It'll, make B- art or B- literature. And for some people, that's all they want to read because they just want something vaguely, titillating. And
yeah, I suppose I have a somewhat similar answer. And to get this checked off my list early in my response, the question that Deckard, or Harrison Ford's character, is implied to realize sort of at the end of Roy's speech is that, replicants do have experiences. They are aware in these, not just because maybe he knew that they were self-aware before the speech, but obviously as incoherent as it is from a storytelling perspective, we'll set that aside. Despite that, Roy does bear witness to these things that Harrison Ford presumably also desires. Like, oh my gosh, seeing what the stars look like next to Orion's belt, man, that's extraordinary. That must be a really beautiful thing. So presumably is not just self-aware, but he experiences beauty, right? That's what I feel like is being communicated in that speech. But the question is, can a robot experience that, or AI? Well, definitely not right now. And so that's how I'm going to use that to continue answering this question with that reality that it is objectively, no one is making an argument that AI is self-aware right now. And maybe it never will be. But art, like experience has to come from it. And like you said, Matt, this I did think is certainly possible. A market will emerge for AI-generated art, quote unquote. Maybe cheaply produced novels or cheaply produced wall art. I think that's sort of unavoidable. That's going to happen. And probably does exist to some extent. But, of course, art is not just an attractive. One aspect of art is how it manifests itself, like just what it looks like, whether it's a collection of words that just sound beautiful, whether it's music or a book, or an image that looks compelling. But there's also the other aspect of it of where did the artist come from? What were the qualities in their experience that compelled them to make that piece of art? Like, that is, like, for a self-aware, conscientious person, like, that is so much of what art is. Is it 90%? Is it 10%? I don't know if you can necessarily draw those numbers, but yeah, so for that reason, but now let's continue playing with hypotheticals. Let's say that the robot becomes self-aware. Okay, well now presumably it does have the capacity to interpret its reality in some way, and then from that standpoint create some kind of art. But there's one more in my mind, sort of like sub-point to that experience factor, that you have to be able to experience reality, is that there is also some quantity of, how would you say it? Not dissonant, shortcoming, straining, inability for something within you, something within your heart and your soul to grasp as far as that art is straining to reach, right? I'm sort of bringing to mind St. Augustine's words, my heart is restless until it rests in you, Lord, right? Like that is in effect like what good art is. It is trying to strain towards that infinite horizon, right? It's trying to articulate that, right? Because we are limited, because we're finite, because we impose limitations on ourselves through our sin and not impose it through our biology, but it is still reality. Whereas a robot, like, what are its limitations? Now, you could argue, well, it is still operating in a finite world, so in that sense, it's not infinite. But let me pose another hypothetical here. Some sense of limitation in ourselves, right, comes from like, oh, goodness, I really wish that how I communicated with my mom the other day would have went like this. I should have said this instead of this. And so like those kinds of experiences that we can all imagine that we know that we have with different people, that is also a way that art is informed, right? So it brings in the moral component, like I should have done this versus a robot. There will come a time I'm reading like where robots AI is going to be emailing other AI in order to access what's going on. But is that AI ever going to say, I should have done this in this kind of communication with the AI? Which brings up the whole question of, in a whole different way of like where morality comes from in this way that hasn't necessarily been like asked before, right? Because up to this point, it's been, it's just this evolutionary thing. That's all morality is. But seeing it, it's almost like seeing evolution happen in this whole other way, in a sense. So for those reasons, I say no, AI cannot create art. I had some follow-up thoughts, but we'll leave it there for now.
Yeah. Every word ever printed, it is learning from. If a human has ever responded that way, it could respond that way. It's going to be able to fake it to degrees that we can't even imagine.
At least for right now, it's like a word probability thing, which to me seems good art. Seems to be very not just a probability.
Right. Yeah.
It's much more. It's very It's the idea of art is that it's wrought and dripping and drenched in intention.
Yeah.
And like you said, it's the straining, all these things, these longings and whatever.
2 thoughts on the art question. First, what does the AI say itself? The AI says art is a form of human expression.
You can tell when it's being diplomatic, though, which is interesting.
It's like, if the definition is human expression, then no, like, it can't do it. Now, obviously, it can do it. Like, it, technically now, like, it's B- work. Like, some of the imagery, more people have played around with GPT than like, you can do text to image and like try to get it to create an image. That stuff is like kind of bad right now. I'd call it like D+. Theoretically, like if you ask it to like, paint me the Sistine Chapel, only make it include these forms and landscapes and people, it'll reproduce it perfectly, right? But that's not interesting. Like when you walk through an art museum today, that everything before the Impressionists or who are the guys in Paris who just went rogue? Yeah, I'm not an art history major, but 1870s, the guys are like, screw technically being proficient. Let's just paint whatever we want. Up until that point is like, you were like art was like, how good can you paint the scene with perfect light, etc. Mm-hmm. And it was all a technical merit skill. Late 1800s in Paris, they're like, F it, do something cool. So we're gonna, Picasso would have been like the 40-year down the road version of that, like abstraction, impressionist. And so when you walk through an art museum, it's like anything before 1880 is like everyone was striving for this technical ability. It was thrown off tracks, and now it's like the world's going to open. You can do whatever you want. Here's some works that painters who still tried to paint the Sistine Chapel. And you have to interpret it through the time in which it was created. And so I think that, like Michael Schaefer's novel written in 2022 is way more valuable, way more interesting than anything attributed to Michael Schaefer's name written beyond 2022, just for the fact that he might have had access to ChatGPT after that, and we don't know. And I think if you're going to allow for like, can AI create art, then it's all contextual, and like the time frame matters a lot. And is modern art? It's more about the person who decided to do something that's never been done before, even if it's a banana on a toilet that was just flushed, whatever.
David Perel podcast reference.
All that to say, like, we all should have written novels last year, because now it doesn't even matter. I wonder if real non-AI use, writing, perhaps painting or pictures or whatever, I wonder if, in order to distinguish the real from the AI, like if the real will get more abstract or less.
Interesting.
Or will it? Yeah, I don't. Like, there will have to be a way to like distinguish, like, this was homemade, this was human done, and I don't know what direction that will be, but I think there will be I don't think AI is going to be good enough to obliterate the human touch completely, but I have no idea how the human touch will be able to be identified.
Like right now, like I've quizzed ChatGPT on paragraphs that it wrote versus I wrote, and I mean it can tell the difference.
It doesn't count if only the AI can tell the difference. It has to be. It only counts if.
Interesting. There are a lot of weird meta games.
If human can.
I should start playing with ChatGPT.
What it tends to produce is just
the most boring Wikipedia article possible about whatever you type in.
I wouldn't even necessarily say boring. I'd say sterile. Almost like there can be interesting people, but they're still sort of like filling a certain category, if you will. That's sort of like what ChatGPT is. Like, oh, this is what an interesting person looks like. Yeah. Something like that. Okay, so this sort of ties in with what Matt had brought up. Is AI just going to be something like the smartphone, where it's certain fraction of the population is just going to abuse it and then become, versus the other fraction of the population, which knows how to utilize it as a tool? Well, I don't know if I want to run with that one right now. Let me think for a little bit.
Matt, have you used it at all?
I've never entered anything into ChatGPT.
So
and I think I looked it up because you have to make an account, right?
Yeah, you have to make an account.
Yeah. I think I got to that point and I'm like, all right, maybe I'll do it later.
So I have the app on my phone. I would say maybe there's this like big AI thing. A simpler version of it is like, when you type something into Google, it's actually still, it's fairly hard to find the answer. Like, if you're just like, give me a taco recipe, 10 links, you know what you're going to get. You're going to get a website full of ads and pictures, and you're going to have to scroll through it and then screenshot the bottom part and then, go off your phone. Like,
sure. Grandkids one day will be like, oh my gosh, that was barbaric. How did you ever eat?
So where I've got it's not called it references the Chat GPT database, but like I've got an AI app on my phone. It's like taco recipe, and it just gives you the text. Boom. Like the incremental widespread uses will be like, if you're looking for an answer to something, and like Google is great because it's the way to search something with the ubiquitous knowledge, and like it's the internet instead of the encyclopedia or like the recipe box. But now that it's so burdened with ads, most of this AI is just like remove all the ads and just give you the answer.
Until AI starts doing
Until they start having the ads, and exactly. Yeah. So that's like the incremental version of like, we used to use paper maps, and then we use MapQuest, and then we use Google Maps. It's probably just a step along the line of like taking all the fluff out of Google search and the internet and distilling it down to just like, what info do you need? And I'm the AI is 95% right. This is what you're looking for.
So I was talking with Sean, a former two-time introducer of the show, about AI and whatnot. And I was initially just leaning more Luddite and alarmist. But I think he really kind of helped like talk me down quite a bit in terms of like just that analogy, I guess. And insofar as like, I guess like outsourcing is kind of like the theme that seems rather like non-human. You're just kind of outsourcing. We used to be the types of creatures that would either share recipes and knowledge and cooking wisdom with one another and hand it down from generations and in communities. And like, there are all these characteristics that kind of defined these communities, and this kind of organic thing emerged. But really, like Chat GPT isn't that far from Googling a taco recipe. Not that you couldn't do it, but at the same time, like there was a time and place where like maybe that was handed down. And now you're the type of person who knows the taco recipe. You're the type of person who has like engaged with taco eating people, as opposed to this sort of like, outsourced thing. And that's where like, I think it's lowered my alarmism for like AI, but I think it's also raised my alarmism for the internet in general, because like, it's the same thing. I'm still kind of like outsourcing and renting these skills from the internet.
Yeah.
Or these things from the internet or from whatever.
Right.
Or from their smartphone. Instead of like owning them myself.
Correct. Yeah.
And like honing this culinary skill where like I identify patterns, instead of like, oh, what does the recipe say? It's like, no, like, what does my experience tell me? What am I like? Now I'm wrestling with food.
Right.
In a way that makes me a true cook.
Correct. Yeah. No, I gave the concurring opinion there. Like, oh, it's just a step change, a small incremental step change from Google search. I think the dissenting opinion is like, yeah, it is removing you from that passed along oral memorizing community knowledge and turning it over into the bland taco recipe of the AI that will like assimilate everyone into, perfect uniformity and reduce.
It's like, it's not like our choice will be taken away. Like, we can no longer look at all taco recipes, in the same way that right now, being a Wall Street Journal paper hard copy reader, Landon recently received an article I cut out in the newspaper, right? Whereas people used to do that all the time. I have to imagine I'm not quite the only one. There's probably like 7 other people in the United States who are still doing this.
Definitely the youngest.
Right. I am making a choice to do this in the same way that in the future, maybe 75% of the time or some fraction of the time, I'm just asking for ChatGPT to give me a taco recipe versus like, oh, there's a special occasion, so I'm going to take the time to find the absolute best taco recipe, right? And going through the old-fashioned steps of Google or something like that. But what I sort of want to try to get at and play with a little bit here is the most challenging questions that AI poses is very much less the non-zero risk, as Elon Musk likes to say, that you're going to have a Roy Batty situation, but rather the sort of challenge that's going to pose, the moral challenge is going to pose to persons in the developed world in the same way that smartphones have, but times 100 or 1,000.
Yeah.
I don't know. It might be fun to talk a little bit like as very trying Christians, like what does it look like raising your child now, not just with a smartphone, but with AI, or what sort of moral habitual risks do we anticipate to society? And are those risks potentially utterly destabilizing?
Yeah. Yes.
I guess when you're talking,
go Matt, but
when you're talking
totally.
moral habitual risks, you're saying just like asking, hey, ChatGPT, should I play video games or visit my grandpa in the hospital? Like, you're saying like that sort of stuff, or like,
that sort of stuff, or
moral habitual risks.
Okay, maybe a better.
Let's throw out some examples of what we all think that means.
Is I don't know how to write any sort of paper because ChatGPT writes them all, and we have not figured out a way to correct for that.
Yeah, it's like you're in 2005, you didn't do your homework. SparkNotes was online. Yeah, my first thought was actually like SparkNotes was a book at the bookstore, and you would go to the bookstore and read it. But I don't know if I'm that old. I'm sure it was online.
I remember reading SparkNotes in high school.
Online or
Yeah.
I remember it at Barnes and Noble, and I was like, "Oh, there's all the answers, the Romeo and Juliet SparkNotes in book form." I don't know if I Googled it.
I would just read the first part of the assignment and make sure I was the first one to answer the question in the discussion, and then I was done.
But so this would be the main example. It's like we could find the one version of the cheat code, and now there's a whole AI for the cheat code for almost everything. And that is a moral, intellectual hazard because you would lose the ability to learn how to think at all.
Yeah. I mean, effectively function. I mean, ultimately. Yeah. I think, so, we're obviously not going to disagree on like any of the risks sort of in this respect. I think it might be interesting though to sort of play with what I was alluding to with the social instability. I've done a lot of these different thought experiments. How much can we hypothetically disagree within a society that something simple, well, in a sense, simple, something that's very familiar to us, right? That the 2020 election was stolen. Okay. Is it possible for a society to continue to function and still at least some fraction of the population believe that? Like, can roads still be built? Can water still be treated at the wastewater treatment plant, et cetera, right? And okay, well, those things continue to be done. You do have more instances of violence, it seems like, in all these, little this or that thing. But ultimately, for the most part, roads are still being built, et cetera, et cetera. But then what happens when, it happens again in 2024? You have these claims, but it becomes more believable. Maybe you sort of get what I'm getting at, because eventually at some point, this did just happen this past year or something. There was a guy, maybe, I don't know if you guys heard about this, a guy who worked at the wastewater treatment plant, and because of what he read about fluoride, he took fluoride out of the city drinking water. Just on his own, right? The point being is, at some point, because different groups of people become so different, whether it's regarding a 2020 election belief or because, oh my gosh, you have not like seen your grandfather who lives 3 miles away for 7 years. Like, I can't even fathom that. Like, there is nothing I can be sympathetic to at all about that person. And at what point do you basically, like right now, we basically function as an American tribe. Like, that's one of our tribal identities. Is ChatGPT going to be something that's going to amplify these differences that have already emerged and basically make it impossible to function as an American society?
And I could even almost see the risk being there being risk the opposite direction too, in that, like, because I could certainly see, like, all right, ChatGPT, tell me all the reasons why this bogus thing is true. Insert whatever conspiracy thing you don't like, but it could also be, I mean, I think very easily manipulated by people who, like, nobody knows. Like, I don't know who the people are who are making these things. I don't know how they're programming them or what kind of subtle, like, computer twists you can add on things. But, like, is there like a Brave New World type of conformity being driven, right? So, like, Mike, you talked about this division being created by ChatGPT, but I think there's also a danger in, like, just too much conformity from ChatGPT. If you have
taco recipes, everyone's eating the same tacos.
But I think on a moral level, if you're talking about, like, ChatGPT says, if I'm having a bad day, I don't need to visit my grandpa. But if, like, all right, you just keep saying that, then it's 7 years before you see your grandpa. And, like, you've got, like, yeah, I guess, like, I could see there being, with any moral question, like, insert, abortion, gay marriage, transgender, all these hot button things. Like, if ChatGPT is seen as the new moral compass for society, and that is, like, uniformly accepted, that could be, I would say, equally dangerous.
Yeah, I agree with that, but I don't think, well, it certainly doesn't it's not going to answer. Like, if I ask it, should my girlfriend get an abortion? It's not going to answer. It's okay. It says I'm not qualified to make personal and medical decisions, blah, blah.
Okay.
And so I don't think, unless something very dramatic change, I don't think it's ever going to operate in that way. Like I said, I understand what you're saying.
There's only one, ChatGPT's OpenAI, Google, Bard kind of still sucks. Like, I've answered, and those are still firms that pretty set guardrails on what they'll let the model answer. You're not going to find anything about turning off the fluoride at a water plant on AI. That's going to come from Twitter until more language learning models are built to open source the whole internet rather than a certain segment of it, in which, you'll be able to, you can already, I don't think that problem isn't an AI problem. It's more of I think what we've discussed the last couple minutes is kind of separate than AI. AI will amplify it eventually, but right now it's probably more curtailing it than anything at the very moment.
The conformity, or curtailing, like, the division, and, like,
curtailing the division when everybody was on, like, ChatGPT 6 months ago. It's not as much. Like, you could ask it, like, write me a cheery poem about Joe Biden, and be like, Joe Biden was the best ever. Write me a cheery poem about Donald Trump. It's like, I'm not allowed to do that. Like, you can, in any political issue, it's very one-sided.
I know since then a lot of that's been, like, corrected, and I don't know what drives that, if that's, like, behind the scenes people pulling levers, or if it's just the machine's learning a wider variety of things. Like, that much
Okay, Matt's going to turn on the alarm, understandably, because I am a little bit surprised by this. So actually, I am looking at the rest of this. It says steps you can take if I'm asking about my girlfriend getting an abortion. It does say number 5, respect her autonomy. Ultimately, the decision should be made by your girlfriend, as it is her body. And they do reference at the end, this is challenging, blah, blah, blah. Or if you need help, you can contact Planned Parenthood or other reproductive health.
Yeah, but that's
clinics. Okay, well, that's...
that's also what you're going to get at, like, general doctor. Unless it's a a Catholic hospital system that like actually values their Catholic heritage, like.
Yeah, that kind of proves both points, I think.
And that's where it comes down to like, humans tend to worship things. For a long time, it was pagan deities. And then for a long time, it was Christianity, at least in Europe. And then, Muhammad in the Middle East and, whatever. And then it became like the artist and the philosopher maybe in like the 1718, and post-enlightenment. And now it's the scientist, the science, we believe in science. The science says this, and as if like, when people used to say, oh, well, Pastor so-and-so said this and the priest said, like it would just be like, oh, yep, they say it. It's, so like now it's the science. But I could totally see ChatGPT being like, oh, well, I wasn't sure what to do, but ChatGPT said this, so like maybe it is just another idol in the list of idols that humans have always had.
Yeah, we live in an abnormal time, and the fact that I think some things have been sheltering us, and I'm not sure if we're going to be able to. Will we protect those things that shelter us? And if we don't, that will be actually more normal than if we do. If it's not it's always a foreign enemy, it's always an internal strife, and it's always a lack of a resource. Like pretty much all three of those things are. And now we've added almost like a fourth one with like a massive technological advancement, plus a foreign enemy, plus internal strife, plus nature combating us. And yeah, that'll be hard to go undefeated like for many generations.
Yeah, that's well said. About time for the final bell.
Sure.
Ding, ding, ding.
One more round. There's no stopping this now. This is our round. Don't stop it now. To start, we don't stop. All your strength, all your power, all your love, everything you've got. This all light to do it now.
Here's the final bell. With all that being said, what scares you the most about AI? But what are you most excited, hopeful about? Be specific. Let's avoid abstractions as much as possible.
I think what scares me the most about AI is, how do I synthesize this? I think it is as big as the internal combustion engine. It is as big as the Industrial Revolution. Even if we can't, like right now, it's writing paragraphs for us. It's pretty easy. You could say it's like Google Maps instead of MapQuest or instead of the paper map. Like all the same information is just the speed at which what you get it. But I do think that just as the Amish kind of took the exit ramp and were like, nope, we're gonna call it good here. We have tools that are saws and blades and man operated. We're gonna just say no to ice and take the exit ramp. I think there probably will be, maybe there won't be, but there probably should be a whole new
the new Amish
class of people, or a moral, perhaps religious, perhaps just like mindful, healthy way to be like, we're good here. Like, we'll stop at Google Maps, we'll stop at email, text, looking up source material. We're not going to do the AI thing. I think about this. I think it would behoove all of us to think about, like, is this a possible exit ramp?
But Landon, you're already more entrenched than all of us. You've got it as an app on your phone. You're gone. We have
correct
to kill you.
For sure. No.
You got to know the enemy, Mike.
I
friends close and your enemy's close.
I think when I think about it as like a 100%, I have it up right now. This screen has it, and I'm just like typing in stuff. I'm like, oh, what's the definition of that with that? And I'm probably like too far gone. Like, I'm probably going to use it for these menial tasks. It'll be a separator. I think maybe not this version of what it is today, but at some point in the future, it will be like, Are we going to use horses or cars? And all of that entails.
Oh, yeah. Landon's going to be like, I'm
Right.
stopping at Chat GPT 19, guys. Like, this is it. I'm...
Because I think you get, I don't know, I think you get dumber. I did not use, I remember being like a 24-year-old, my first job, I'd get in the car with like an older guy. We're going to like a part of Illinois, like 2-hour drive to another office in my company. Like, it's so easy to get there. And he would type in the address and want to know to get there at like, are we going to get there at 4:10 or 4:30? It's like, who cares? You know how to get there. Why do you need to inform and communicate whether it's a 20-minute difference? And it's like that accelerated the speed. He told the people we're getting there at 4:10 or whatever. And I myself never used Google Maps on my phone in a car till I was like 25, 26. Like, memorize 4 points, get in the car, go. Like, we'll figure it out by the time we're near. You know, we can call them. We could text them if we're lost. Like, we don't need to be there right at whatever time. Like, there's not a level of urgency there. And now it's like I almost always put in the address, and it's like I've got to get there to the minute. I've got to beat the time. And if that is true for like any written word that I do at all in technology, to what that did with my directional ability, like I don't know. That I know how dumb I got on directional ability and like navigating cities and states. If that is true for every time I type, I'm going to become useless.
I think what I'm afraid of is less interesting, because I think it's just the more obvious things. I would be afraid of like behavior prediction and manipulation just by like big forces. We like big businesses, government, pharma, whatever, insert the big, I could see Chat GPT even further enhancing kind of the behavior prediction stuff that already exists, and just kind of creating almost like a surveillance world, be it like business, or I think also just like the social interactions and isolation. I don't know if I feel like I've used this example in a different podcast, but I remember as a kid, if there was like some random historical question that came up at the dinner table, like we would call my Uncle Lawrence every now and then. Or he was my great uncle, I guess, my great uncle. So he, history teacher, like just knew all sorts of stuff. We'd end up having a conversation with him, and he loved it. He was never married, never had kids. So like, I mean, I don't know if he was quite as close as like our grandparents, but like close to that. And it was a fun thing, just chat with Uncle Lawrence. Whereas like, oh, Chat GPT, what happened in, this battle in World War II? Like, yeah, that's not the same. Things I'm excited about. I know I posted one of the things in the notes about some medical things maybe being oversteps, but I think there are a lot of medical efficiencies that could come from it that I think would be good. I don't know. A lot of in-person PT is a very inefficient way of delivering physical therapy to people. I don't think we necessarily need that. So I could see AI potentially transforming how we do that. And certainly like same thing in a lot of other scenarios. I mean, there's a huge doctor shortage, I think, pretty much across the United States, but certainly in more rural areas, where I could see AI potentially allowing for just like at least protocol-driven care in rural areas and stuff delivered by, APNs or nurses or whoever, people who aren't physicians to maybe step in. Another interesting dynamic. So a lot of the jobs that would be made more efficient are kind of your like, at least from, and tell me if I'm wrong, I haven't used this as much, but probably your like low-level professional jobs, right? So like your paralegal whose job is just to like summarize legal documents, like ChatGPT, summarize this report in 300 words or something, I could see like those types of jobs being the one that go, which I think might create just interesting, like where do those people end up? And these are people who are like educated, potentially more creative, or hopefully more creative, at least somewhat ambitious if they went through school and, did that sort of stuff. I don't know. I could see that creating like at least interesting opportunities. Maybe just shifting people going into the trades because there's a huge trade shortage. But if we don't need as many kind of low-level marketing jobs, and kind of like Landon mentioned, like I am curious. I'm excited about like maybe the kickback. I would say there's something about it that is kind of a scary overstep, maybe by technology, if you want to think of it that way, as if like technology is like its own person. But it just seems like, whoa, that's a big. And yeah, I could see that maybe just waking people up a little more and kind of causing, I wouldn't say a rebellion, but more like Landon said, more of the Amish step back.
What I am most scared of, what I was alluding to before, where I guess you would call it social decay. I'm not worried about it so much affecting me calling my Uncle Lawrence for history facts because, well, sometimes you'll call him just for the heck of it, for the history fact, even though you could look it up, right? Just, a month or so ago, I wrote down the recipe for this lasagna on an index card and mailed it to my goddaughter, Audrey, right? Of course, I could have just texted it or emailed it, whatever, but no, I wrote it down, right? So it's like, I more or less trust, even though I could do better, I still generally trust my decision-making of when it is more appropriate to be analog. As we discussed, Landon is already too far gone. He is using Google Maps to go to anything outside his door. But how those kinds of decisions are going to be outsourced in the lives of other people, and how that's going to make a less commonly functioning society, a less common set of behaviors that we can expect from each other is reasonable. I was just listening on KMOX recently that the highest percentage of kids who are not potty trained entered kindergarten this year. I would say that is a good example of a social expectation that we like to have. Most excited. Oh, one other thing sort of scared about, I would say, is an evaporation of meaningful challenge, right? Like, I would think if I wanted to be a paralegal and now suddenly this opportunity was gone, it's like, oh my gosh, then how am I going to challenge myself professionally? But new opportunities come up. And I think that what I've been coming back to is, I think maybe Bishop Barron said this, there's two things you can't avoid, and it's sin and death, right? Like AI is never going to magically make sin go away. The challenge we're battling to stop sinning, right? It's not going to make it go away. So that challenge and all the different ways it manifests itself is always going to be there. And that is obviously, the most important, challenge to undergo, right? Yeah, those are I'm two most scared of. I've figured out how to get around the second one, though, really. Just thinking a little bit. Most excited, hopeful about, we haven't brought it up, but it definitely is really two specific things. It is a cure for something like Alzheimer's or dementia, and it's not like there's going to be a cure for climate change, but presumably some profound advancements in renewable technologies, right? It's going to reduce our global carbon footprint by like 30% over 10 years. So something like that. The Alzheimer's dementia was, I think, a little bit easier to focus in on. If we're asking the question like AI or you don't have to see your parents go through that. Because, I'm honest, I'm anxious. I'm nervous, oh my gosh, one of these years, oh, why did mom or dad, say that goofy thing? Oh my gosh, is that, having seen my one of my grandparents suffer through that and the strain that puts on families, and not to mention just the sensibility of faith on individuals as well. That is just so heavy. And if accepting the various costs we've already discussed with AI as a part of that, then seems like a pretty fair deal for me. And climate change, don't want to be a catastrophist, but it is something that affects the whole world. So solid show, Matt. I think, what do we have going on next episode?
I'm thinking we dip back into Rocky. Speeches in the 80s. Maybe I'm pulling a Schaefer and going speech dialogue combo. But the beach dialogue between Rocky and his wife, Rocky 3. The beach dialogue. We all know what that's about.
Yeah. Man, I don't love that speech. What do you have in mind for directions for that speech?
Really? Oh man.
It doesn't make sense, I feel like.
It'll make sense by the end of next episode.
You didn't listen to one of our recent episodes when my mom said we're not allowed to do Rocky. I mean, she said it half jokingly, but she said too much Rocky. I mean, it's your speech. You pick it. It's in the 80s, but
that's where I was thinking.
Hey, thanks for drinking and thinking with us. Be safe out there, and we'll talk with you next time.
Come and go. Look toward the horizon. Up ahead you'll find a peace of mind, relief from the trying. I have burned a bridge, wrecked in a ditch, had to ask forgiveness. Dead ends come and go. Look toward the horizon. Oh, there are stories to tell. The times we grew and the times we fell. Oh, I've been afraid some days, but the road will lead us to a better place.